The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Redemption Creek, a frontier town where justice was as harsh as the desert winds. A crowd had gathered around the old oak tree that served as the town's gallows, their faces a mixture of curiosity and grim satisfaction. In the center of it all stood a boy, no more than 14 years old, his wrists bound with coarse rope, his eyes wide with terror, but his chin held defiantly high. Thomas Fletcher, Sheriff Morrison's voice boomed across the square. You stand accused of theft. The penalty for stealing bread from Mrs. Henderson's bakery is death by hanging, as decreed by the town council. The boy's legs trembled, but he refused to beg. He'd stolen that loaf of bread for his dying mother, lying sick in their one-room shack on the outskirts of town. His father had been killed in a mining accident 6 months ago, leaving them with nothing but debt and desperation. The bread had been their only hope for another day. Any last words, boy? Sheriff Morrison asked, adjusting the noose with practiced efficiency. Thomas opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the sound of spurs clicking against the wooden boardwalk cut through the tension. The crowd parted, like the Red Sea, as a figure emerged from the shadows of the saloon. He was tall and lean, with weathered hands that spoke of years on the frontier and eyes as gray as storm clouds. A worn leather duster hung from his shoulders, and a silver star gleamed on his chest, a Texas Ranger's badge. Hold on there, Sheriff, the stranger said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen more than his share of frontier justice. Name's Captain Jake Thornton. I'd like to have a word about this boy. Sheriff Morrison's face flushed red. This ain't your jurisdiction, Ranger. This is town business. Captain Thornton stepped closer, his hand resting casually on the grip of his Colt .45. When I see a child about to be hanged for trying to feed his dying mother, it becomes my business. What kind of men are you? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others grumbled about outsiders interfering with their justice. Mrs. Henderson, the baker whose bread had been stolen, stepped forward. She was a stout woman with flour-dusted hands and a heart harder than week-old biscuits. That boy stole from me fair and square, she declared. I worked hard to bake that bread, and he took it without paying. The law is the law. Captain Thornton studied her for a long moment, then reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small leather pouch and counted out several silver coins. How much was the bread worth, ma'am? Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened. Well, it was about 50 cents. The ranger placed a silver dollar on the makeshift table beside the gallows. There, the debt is paid, with interest. He turned to face the crowd, his voice rising. This boy committed no crime that deserves death. He was trying to save his mother's life. Is that the kind of justice you want Redemption Creek to be known? For the crowd began to shift uncomfortably. Some of the women started whispering among themselves, their maternal instincts stirring as they looked at the terrified boy. But Sheriff Morrison wasn't ready to back down. The law is the law, Ranger. We can't just let criminals walk free because they have sob stories. Captain Thornton's eyes hardened. What crime? The boy was hungry, his mother was dying, and instead of helping, this town chose to make an example of him. That's not justice, that's cruelty. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Thomas watched in amazement as the stranger risked everything to save his life. Hope began to flicker in his chest like a candle flame in the wind. I'll tell you what, Captain Thornton continued, his voice carrying across the square. I'll take responsibility for this boy. I'll see that he makes amends for what he took, and I'll help him find honest work to support his mother. But I won't stand by and watch you hang a child for trying to keep his family alive. The crowd was divided now. Some called for the hanging to proceed, while others began to see the wisdom in the ranger's words. Mrs. Henderson looked at the silver dollar, then at the boy's tear-stained face. Sheriff, she said quietly, maybe the ranger has a point. The boy's paid for the bread now, and, well, maybe there's been enough suffering in this town. Sheriff Morrison's face was red with anger and embarrassment. He'd been challenged in front of the whole town, and his authority was slipping away like sand through his fingers. His hand moved toward his gun, but Captain Thornton was faster, his own weapon clearing leather in a blur of motion. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Sheriff, the ranger said calmly. "This doesn't have to end badly for anyone." The standoff lasted several heartbeats, the only sound the whisper of wind through the oak tree's branches. Finally, Sheriff Morrison's hand fell away from his gun. He knew he was beaten, and the smart thing was to retreat with what dignity he had left. "Fine," he muttered, untying the noose from around Thomas's neck. "But this boy is your responsibility. Now, Ranger, if he causes any more trouble, it's on your head." Captain Thornton holstered his weapon and smiled. "I'll take that responsibility gladly." As Thomas rubbed his freed wrists, tears streaming down his face, Captain Thornton placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What's your name, son?" "Thomas Fletcher, sir." Thank you for saving my life." "Don't thank me yet, Thomas. We've got work to do. Your mother needs medicine, and you need to learn how to make an honest living. Are you ready for that?" Thomas nodded eagerly, his eyes bright with newfound hope. "Yes, sir. I'll do whatever it takes." Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from the Wild West. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to never miss an adventure. That will keep you on the edge of your seat. 3 days had passed since the near hanging at Redemption Creek, and Thomas Fletcher found himself in a world he never could have imagined. Captain Jake Thornton had been true to his word, taking the boy under his wing and teaching him the hard lessons of frontier survival. They'd set up camp just outside town, where Thomas could still visit his ailing mother while learning the skills that would shape his future. "Focus, boy," Captain Thornton said, his voice steady but firm. "A man's gun is only as good as his ability to use it when it matters most." Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow as he lined up another shot at the makeshift targets. They'd set up among the Joshua trees. His hands were still shaking from the memory of the noose round his neck, but each day brought a little more confidence. The ranger had given him his father's old Colt .36, cleaned and oiled until it gleamed like new. "I can't seem to hit anything, Captain," Thomas said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this." Captain Thornton walked over and placed a weathered hand on the boy's shoulder. "Son, 3 days ago you were ready to face death with more courage than most grown men. Don't tell me you can't learn to shoot straight." He paused, studying Thomas's stance. "Your problem isn't your aim, it's your fear. You're still afraid of what might happen, instead of focusing on what needs to happen." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their lesson. Both man and boy turned to see a lone rider approaching at full gallop, dust billowing behind him like a brown cloud. As the rider drew closer, Thomas recognized him as Billy Morrison, the sheriff's youngest son. "Captain Thornton," Billy called out, pulling his horse to a skidding stop. "You need to come quick. There's been trouble in town." The ranger's expression hardened. "What kind of trouble, boy?" Billy's eyes were wide with fear and excitement. "It's the Crane brothers. They rode into town about an hour ago, demanding money from all the shopkeepers. They said they heard about what happened with Thomas here, and they figure the town's gone soft. They're robbing everyone blind." Thomas felt his heart sink. The Crane brothers were notorious outlaws who'd been terrorizing the territory for months. 3 brothers, Marcus, Dale, and young Pete, each more ruthless than the last. If they were in Redemption Creek, it meant serious trouble. "How many men does your father have with him?" Captain Thornton asked, already moving toward his horse. "Just Deputy Collins and old Mr. Weatherby," Billy replied. "Most of the other men are out at the mines or working their claims, Captain. They're asking for you by name." Marcus Crane said he wants to meet the ranger who thinks he can change how things work around here. Captain Thornton cursed under his breath. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. By challenging the town's harsh justice, he'd inadvertently made them appear weak to every outlaw in the territory. Now innocent people were paying the price for his intervention. "Thomas," he said, turning to the boy, "you stay here. Keep practicing with that gun. And whatever you do, don't come into town until I get back." "But Captain," Thomas protested, "this is my fault. If I hadn't stolen that bread, if you hadn't saved me, none of this would be happening." The ranger's eyes softened for a moment. "Son, you can't control what evil men choose to do. You can only control how you respond to it right now. The best thing you can do is get good with that gun and be ready to protect your mother if trouble Comes this way. As Captain Thornton mounted his horse, Thomas grabbed his stirrup. What if you don't come back? The ranger looked down at the boy who'd become like a son to him in just 3 short days. Then you'll know that some things are worth dying for. But don't worry, boy. I didn't save you from a hanging just to let some Tibet outlaws ruin everything. We've started building. With that, Captain Thornton spurred his horse toward town, leaving Thomas standing alone in the desert with Billy Morrison. The boy watched until the ranger disappeared into the heat shimmer, then turned back to his gun practice with renewed determination. In town, the Crane brothers had taken over the Silver Dollar Saloon, turning it into their temporary headquarters. Marcus Crane, the eldest and most vicious of the 3, sat with his boots propped up on a table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in one hand and a smoking cigar in the other. His brothers flanked him, their hands never far from their guns. "Well, well," Marcus said as Captain Thornton pushed through the saloon doors. "The famous Texas Ranger who thinks he can teach frontier towns about mercy. You've caused us a lot of trouble, Captain." "How's that?" Thornton replied, keeping his voice calm despite the tension crackling in the air. "See, when word gets out that Redemption Creek is going soft, not hanging thieves and letting outsiders dictate their justice, it makes other towns think they can do the same. That's bad for business. Our business." Dale Crane, the middle brother, laughed coldly. "We make our living keeping these towns scared and compliant. You've upset the natural order of things." Captain Thornton's hand moved slowly toward his gun. "So you decided to rob innocent people. To prove a point, we decided to show this town what real outlaws look like," Marcus replied. "Maybe next time they'll think twice before letting sentiment override good sense." The confrontation was interrupted by the sound of rapid gunfire from outside. Through the saloon windows, they could see smoke rising from the direction of the general store. Young Pete Crane came running in, his face flushed with excitement. "Marcus, there's a problem. That kid, the one who was supposed to be hanged, he's in town, and he's got a gun." Captain Thornton's blood ran cold. Thomas had disobeyed orders and come to town, probably trying to help. Now the boy was in mortal danger, and it was all because of the choice the ranger had made 3 days ago. "Looks like your little protege wants to play hero," Marcus Crane said, standing up and checking his guns. "This should be interesting. Let's go see what the boy's made of." As they walked toward the door, Captain Thornton knew that everything he'd worked for, everything he'd tried to teach Thomas about honor and justice, was about to be put to the ultimate test. The real battle for Redemption Creek was just beginning. Keep watching our channel for more heart-pounding Western adventures. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. In this incredible tale of courage and redemption, the main street of Redemption Creek had become a battleground. Smoke drifted from the windows of Henderson's Bakery, where young Pete Crane had set fire to the flour sacks. After Mrs. Henderson refused to hand over her day's earnings, Thomas Fletcher stood in the middle of the street, his father's Colt .36 in his hand, facing down the most dangerous outlaws in the territory. "Well, looky here," Marcus Crane called out as he emerged from the saloon with his brothers and Captain Thornton. "The little bread thief wants to play gunfighter." Thomas's hand trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "I'm not playing, mister. You're hurting innocent people, and that's not right." Dale Crane laughed harshly. "Boy, you don't even know how to hold that gun properly. Why don't you run along home before you get yourself killed?" "I can't do that," Thomas replied, his eyes never leaving Marcus Crane's face. "Captain Thornton taught me that sometimes a man has to stand up for what's right, even when he's scared." Captain Thornton felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. In 3 days, he'd watched Thomas grow from a desperate, frightened boy into someone willing to risk everything for others. But the ranger also knew that courage without skill was just another word for suicide. "Thomas," he called out, trying to keep his voice calm, "you don't need to do this. These men are my responsibility." "No, Captain," Thomas said, his voice growing stronger. 3 days ago, this town was ready to hang me for stealing bread to feed my mother. You could have ridden on and let them do it, but you didn't. You stood up for what was right, even though it wasn't your fight. Well, now this is my fight." Marcus Crane's expression darkened. He'd had enough of this philosophical discussion. Boy, you've got about 10 seconds to drop that gun and walk away. After that, I'm going to put a bullet in you just to make a point." Thomas looked around at the faces of the townspeople, who were watching from windows and doorways. He saw Mrs. Henderson, whose bread he'd stolen, now looking at him with something like respect. He saw Sheriff Morrison, who'd been ready to hang him, now standing with his own gun drawn, but clearly outmatched. He saw the fear in their eyes, but also something else, hope. "I won't let you hurt these people," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the dusty street. "You want to make a point, then make it with me." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as the two forces faced each other. In the blazing afternoon sun, Captain Thornton knew he was witnessing something extraordinary, a boy becoming a man in the space of a heartbeat. Marcus Crane's hand moved toward his gun, but before he could clear leather, Thomas fired. The shot echoed through the street like thunder, and Marcus stumbled backward. Clutching his right shoulder, blood seeped through his fingers, and his gun fell to the dust. "You little—" Dale Crane started to draw his own weapon, but Captain Thornton was faster. His Colt .45 barked once, and Dale went down hard, his gun spinning away across the street. Young Pete Crane, seeing his brothers down, panicked and ran for the horses. Within seconds, he was galloping out of town, leaving a trail of dust and the echo of his brothers' groans. Thomas stood in the street, his smoking gun still in his hand, hardly believing what had just happened. He'd actually done it. He'd stood up to the worst outlaws in the territory and won. But more importantly, he'd protected the people who'd once been ready to hang him. Captain Thornton walked over and placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Son, that was the finest shooting I've ever seen from someone who claimed he couldn't hit anything 3 days ago." Thomas looked up at his mentor, his eyes bright with tears of relief and pride. "I remembered what you said, Captain. I stopped being afraid of what might happen and focused on what needed to happen." The townspeople began to emerge from their hiding places, gathering around the two heroes. Mrs. Henderson was the first to approach, her flour-dusted apron still smoking from the fire. "Thomas Fletcher," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. 3 days ago, I was ready to see you hang for stealing a loaf of bread. Today, you risked your life to save my store, and probably my life too." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his face red with shame. "Boy, I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. If you'll have me, I'd like to deputize you right here and now." Thomas looked at the badge the sheriff was offering, then at Captain Thornton. "What do you think, Captain? Am I ready for that kind of responsibility?" The ranger smiled, his weathered face creasing with pride. "Thomas, you've already proven you understand what it means to be a lawman. It's not about the badge or the gun, it's about being willing to stand between good people and those who would hurt them." As Thomas pinned the deputy's badge to his shirt, the crowd began to cheer. The boy who'd been destined for the gallows had become the town's newest protector. But more than that, he'd learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength comes not from the ability to take life, but from the courage to protect it. That evening, as the sun set over Redemption Creek, Thomas sat by his mother's bedside. She'd been feeling stronger lately, thanks to the medicine Captain Thornton had bought with his own money. The color was returning to her cheeks, and for the first time in months, she was sitting up and taking notice of the world around her. "Thomas," she said softly, "I heard what happened today. I'm proud of you, son. Your father would be proud too." Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "Ma, I couldn't have done any of it without Captain Thornton. He taught me that being a man isn't about being tough or fearless, it's about doing what's right, even when you're scared." Captain Thornton, who'd been standing quietly in the doorway, stepped into the room. "Thomas, I've got something to tell you. I've been ordered to ride north to investigate some trouble near the border. It's time for me to move on." Thomas felt his heart sink. "But Captain, I still have so much to learn." "Son, you've already learned the most important lessons. The rest will come with time and experience. Besides," he smiled, "Deputy Fletcher has a town to protect now. Redemption Creek needs you more than I do." As Captain Thornton prepared to leave the next morning, Thomas walked with him to the edge of town. "Captain, will I ever see you again?" The ranger swung up into his saddle, and looked down at the young man who'd become like a son to him. "Thomas, in this life, you never know what roads we'll cross again. But I'll tell you this, wherever I go, I'll carry the memory of a boy who had the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the whole world seemed against him." As Captain Thornton rode away into the morning mist, Thomas stood watching until he disappeared from sight. Then he turned back toward town, toward his mother, toward his new life as a lawman. The boy who'd once stolen bread to survive had become a man who would spend his life protecting others. And in the years that followed, whenever travelers passed through Redemption Creek, they would hear the story of Thomas Fletcher, the boy who was saved from the gallows by a stranger's kindness and grew up to become one of the finest lawmen the territory had ever seen. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the Wild West. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more amazing stories of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable human spirit. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more adventures with you. Subscribe now and become part of our growing community of Western story lovers.